Let's get started and finish up with this last panel so we can get out of here early. So panelists, take your seats. So the last panel is we're going to talk about the policy initiatives to position West Virginia to benefit from the new energy economy. In other words, forward-looking. I think we've had previous panels that have identified barriers, whether it be energy efficiency or solar. What are the barriers? This panel is really going to focus on how to address those barriers, eliminate those barriers. What are the policy changes, whether they be statutory or regulatory? So we're going to start off with Emmett Pepper, who's the Executive Director of Energy Efficient West Virginia. He's going to tell us about energy efficiency policies. After that, we're going to hear from Dan Conant, who's the founder of Holler, talk about barriers to solar deployment in the state. And then Walton Shepherd, who's a WVU alum, now working as a staff attorney for the Natural Resources Defense Council out of Washington, D.C., and talk about some of the changes, the programs that have been put in place in Virginia and whether those are replicable in West Virginia. So with that, I'll turn it over to Emmett Pepper.
Okay. Get all set up here. Hey everybody, thanks for having me here. I'm really happy to be here. Both organizations are doing great work, and so I'm glad to be here. I am used to being the last speaker at the Governor's Energy Summit. Usually they put us at the very end after everybody's gone. So I'm glad I still got to have that experience this week because they put me on early last time, earlier this week. Okay, so Energy Efficient West Virginia, just to give you a background, we started in 2009 when, now that Jim's gone, we can say it, was a 40-something% rate hike that Appalachian Power was planning at the time, and zero energy efficiency programs. So we intervened in that case, started the organization, and said we want to address this, and that we should have energy. People should be able to take control of their energy bills. So we started out with Public Service Commission work. We now do advocacy at the legislature as well, and we do a lot of work now. We've been really shifted a lot of our focus to working with the businesses in the state to create more of an identity around energy efficiency policy or energy efficiency businesses, kind of like what Jim was talking about earlier, where he's concerned that there's not enough of a energy efficiency industry to kind of rely on. So that's what we're working on, and Xavier Walters here is doing a lot of that. So energy efficiency, as was referenced earlier, is we don't get a lot of the love that the solar gets, and I always kind of have a chip on my shoulder about that. So you'll probably get that picture throughout this talk today. It's not as exciting, as Autumn said, to just not see something, the higher bill, than to see, hey, look, my meter's running backwards. It's or to see the actual kilowatt hour numbers that you get. So we don't get as much excitement, but we are cheaper. So the facts sometimes, do they still matter? I think they still matter. There's a lot of good reasons to do energy efficiency, obviously to protect against rising rates. I'll talk a little bit about non-energy benefits, but it's jobs really are what everybody's focused on right now, and I think we've heard that. So this explains, I'm not even going to get into the specifics of this, but because I think this next slide is a little better. But the concept here is that energy efficiency is less expensive than other sources of meeting your energy needs through generation. And so this kind of, and price suppression is another aspect of that. So I like this because, so if you're going to, obviously, whenever you have energy needs, you're going to put out the cheapest ones first. So whatever that cheapest power plant is for the first, 20,000 megawatts of load, this is for capacity, is going to be cheaper than the next, et cetera. So if you're able to reduce the demand during the peak times, which is how you determine whether there's a need for capacity, then obviously you're going to be shifting things back to the cheaper one, and not having to go further up this curve. And I'm sure Dan would say the solar does the same thing because it's also often peak incident. So that's one way that it saves people money. I just love this chart just because it's so colorful. But what this just shows is there's a lot of things that energy efficiency provides that have nothing to do with saving money or even the environment. It's one of the biggest things that people will say who have gotten energy efficiency upgrades is, gosh, my home is so much more comfortable. That cold spot that I have to tiptoe around in the wintertime is not there anymore. And it's also healthier. Buildings are much more healthy when they're more energy efficient. But there's a lot of different reasons to like energy efficiency. But jobs is another big one. And energy efficiency most of the time is essentially construction work, because you're making changes to buildings, and energy, with energy efficiency, so that would be the construction here. You have more jobs than you are for the production, which I think makes sense if you think about it, because a lot of the costs that you have for energy is for some commodity or for extraction of the actual fuel. But when you do a construction job or an energy efficiency work, if anybody who has experience with that, the materials aren't the main cost, it's the labor. So that makes sense. You get more jobs out of it. And also, frankly, the energy efficiency folks aren't making the same money that a coal miner makes. But. Okay, so now we're getting to the policies. Now that I got to tout energy efficiency, and now you all are convinced that it's sexy and it's exciting. So this is the annual ranking of states' friendliness, essentially, or compatibility with energy efficiency. This is last year's ranking. The American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, ACEEE, puts that out every year. Last year we were 44th in the nation, and this year we've dropped down, unfortunately. And that's not because we've stopped doing anything, really. It's just that we have to keep up with everybody else. There's a lot that other states are doing that we aren't. And one of the things I think probably this crowd is less important than I did at the governor's summit, that I think a lot of people think that maybe energy efficiency, and I apologize for those who were at the governor's summit because you're going to hear a lot of the same things. The energy efficiency is just like the blue states. It's the places where there's a lot of tree huggers and maybe a lot of patchouli oil being sold. But you have some of that. I mean, it's the West Coast and New England. But once you get past that first tier, I mean, well, actually, even in the first tier, Minnesota is doing a lot on energy efficiency, and in the next tier down, you have Utah, Iowa, Michigan, states that aren't necessarily what you think of when you think of kind of crunchy. But then right in the middle of the pack are some of our neighbors there. So there's no reason to think that's not part of our identity to do more on this. This is an opportunity. I see that. I think that there's a lot of room for improvements and a lot of opportunity for growth in the industry. Okay, so this is kind of breaking down that report. I use the ACEEE report because it's useful to kind of go through all the different aspects and ways that we can be improving. So if you look at it just straight away, you'll notice that most of the states have the green spot there is the utility programs. We're way behind them. Other than Virginia, we're way behind all the other states. And that the dark blue at the top, the state-led initiatives, we're also behind. So that's most of what I'll talk about, but we'll go over all of them in some way. So let's talk about the utility programs, which, of course, in West Virginia is a policy because the Public Service Commission regulates all of our utilities. So this is the ranking of all 50 states on energy efficiency as energy savings as a percentage of sales. So if you sell 100 megawatt hours, then you would, in Massachusetts, I think Massachusetts is the top again, would sell would save, what did I say, 100? 1 or 3 megawatt hours. So, so that's the top of the top. We're down here, so we're at 0.18. And look, I mean, do I think we're going to go overnight to this 1.3 to 3 range? Probably not. And as Jim would probably say, and usually does in testimony at the commission, that their rates are higher and ours are, just like he did today about solar. And so sure, that of course, we're not going to jump right up there. But Kentucky's fairly similar to us, and they're at almost 0.5%. And so I would feel pretty good if we were in that 0.5% to 1% range. That's a really good goal to go for. So we have a long way to go. That happens through better programs. Let me go back to that. Just stay there for a second. There is a big difference between the two utilities in this state. At the governor's summit, we did we had heard from both presidents of Appalachian Power, AEP subsidiary, and from Mon Power from the First Energy subsidiary. And that's 90-something% of the state is covered by those two. And Jim's boss for AEP was very, talked about solar, talked about energy efficiency, and talked about looking at things in a different way. But that didn't happen with Mon Power. They were definitely, they definitely are just wanting to stick to things the way they have been. And that's been the case in our PSC cases as well for energy efficiency. We had a settlement with First Energy where they basically are not even saying they're going to do energy efficiency past the end of their current program they're in, which is, I think, ending in about a year, something like that, maybe less. Okay, yeah, they're Neanderthals.
I got in trouble for saying that.
I won't say that at the commission, because then I'll get in trouble too. But AEP, they, as Jim said, they're pushing for more energy efficiency programs, and then the commission has to come in and say something about it, which was a surprise for all of us who have a lot of PSC cases right now and didn't have time to deal with that. But we are, and so we'll have those hearings on Monday. But for both of the utilities, there's stuff that they're doing in other states that they could be doing here, and this just kind of shows that. Again, Jim's doing a lot more of the things that are in the other states, but there's still a lot to be done, and that just requires, and also in addition to doing this kind of stuff, spending more on the programs that we have that are effective, that are cost effective. And I think Jim, last night we were talking, and he said that the C&I commercial and industrial program is they're running out of money, so they need to up that amount. So next go on to codes. So you can see we are actually kind of in the middle of the pack on codes. This light isn't very big. But that's probably about to change. Because we're kind of right down at the bottom there, and there's no, as far as I know, no push or discussion about adopting more stringent energy efficiency codes. Virginia just improved their codes, probably because of Walton, and but we're behind on that. But I think more importantly than that, well, I'll get to that in a second. We'll get to see Barney in a second. Is the enforcement? Yeah. So. Because how many of you guys have ever had a code inspector say anything about your energy efficiency for your house in West Virginia? Anybody had that happen? And obviously most of that's going to happen on for new construction, but we need to have better, more certainty about when you're buying a house that it's going to meet certain standards. I've had, I do bankruptcy law practice, and we run into all kinds of crazy stuff, and we've had people where their houses weren't meeting, they're falling apart basically, so those people get sued over that. But I mean, who's going to be bringing a lawsuit to enforce the building codes that, oh well, actually it should have been $300 a month instead of $350. I mean, it's just not going to happen, and it's not worth it anyway for the lawyers. So there's a lot of reasons that we should be doing this. But the question is how. I mean, so there's, I think, maybe half a dozen or something jurisdictions in the state where they actually even have code inspectors. So how do we go from that to something larger? And I don't have the answer on that, I don't think. But, I mean, I think we could go statewide. I had people from government say we should push for that. Maybe we should, have some kind of threshold for a higher amount of, or how much population there is. They do that with recycling, where if it's 10,000 or more, you have to have curbside recycling. So, maybe that's the way to go about it. But we definitely need to have more enforcement because we could up the codes to whatever we want, but I mean, it's not really going to make any difference until people enforce that. So that's meant to be. So transparency and benchmarking, I didn't bold the right one there. The concept here is that if you buy a house, it's similar to what we just said, that what your bills are going to be like. How efficient is it going to be? And as the slide says, not a lot of states are doing that. So we would probably be leading the way or being ahead of a lot of other states if we took that on. But I think it's one of those no-duh things that anybody you describe this to, no matter who they are politically or what they think about energy, that seems pretty fair. That you can ask for it, you can require it. Also, it's not in the appraisal value of most homes. They don't even look at energy efficiency. So all of that is something that we need to start looking at because then that'll drive it. Because if people have the information about it, because that's an important part of someone's monthly expenses. It's the mortgage and the energy bills up there. All right, so back to this, just to remind, I think, what are we going to next? Yeah, so state-led initiatives. This is the other main one that we lag behind other states that neighbor us. So financial incentives, if you know me, you know I'm going to talk about the LEAP Act, which is called Property Assessed Clean Energy in other states. But in West Virginia, we don't like property assessments and we don't like clean energy. So we're not going to talk, we don't call it that, we call it the LEAP Act, Local Energy Efficiency Partnership Act. These are some other state financial incentives. I'll get to the LEAP Act in a second. This used to say none, but the WVU is has some incentives for industrial folks and commercial folks here in the state. So, yay, we have something. We had an improvement there. Okay. So the LEAP Act is a bill that has been introduced for the past, I think, 3 sessions, and each year it has had bipartisan sponsorship and bipartisan support. Last year passed through the Senate unanimously all the way through all the committees, and it got through one committee in the House. And then that version of the bill died, and then went to another. The Senate version went over, and it got killed in another committee. And what's frustrating about it is it wasn't that there was like some evil lobbyist that was stopping me along the way. I mean, we had some opposition in previous years from the utilities, and we worked everything out with them so that there was no opposition. There was nobody lobbying against the bill, but there was this kind of knee-jerk reaction that this is too much government interference. There's too much government. This is government backing energy efficiency. And we need to have a free market, which is not true, and I'll go through that. But so it died in a certain House committee. So, but what is it? Okay, so property assessed clean energy is in, as it says there, 34 states. There's active programs in 3 of our 5 neighbors. And what it does is, well, is that all I have on there? Oh, no, sorry about that. It makes it so if you have a commercial building and you want to make upgrades on your energy efficiency upgrades, then you can do so and repay it over time on your tax ticket. So the financing is from private sources. So it makes it easier for you to do that. As was discussed in the last panel, financing is tough. For both energy efficiency and solar, it's that upfront cost that's often the burden, and that holds people back. So there's other aspects to this that some details in there, but basically that's how it works. And the only role that government has is, well, there's two or three, I guess. One, it would be a local government that has to authorize the program to be set up. So it's a buy-in thing. If you don't want to have that in your community for some reason, you don't have to. And this state legislation would authorize it. The other thing is, because the goal here is to make sure that if that the energy efficiency savings, they're going to stay with the building. So the payment for it should stay with the building because that's who's going to benefit from it. And this is working again in other states. So the only way I can think of, if I were going to come up with a way that I could make it so that the cost stays with the building, is that you put it on the tax ticket. And it's basically a voluntary tax that you make on yourself to pay for an improvement on the building that you currently own. And the payment will be less than the actual savings, so based on audits. And so the next person, you're taking the risk on yourself for doing that. You're taking the risk that somebody might not want to buy it later, but you're also knowing that it's going to be cheaper than your actual savings. So you're not going to be losing anything. There's the thing about the senior lien. We ended up having it so there's a veto power of existing mortgage holders. I mean, you can get into the details, but that was something we had to work out with the banking association. So they were opposing us early on. Yeah, I think I said a lot of this stuff already. It's an opt-in. And there are some guarantees. So I mean, in order to attract money in this regard, you're going to have make sure that it's real, that the savings are real, because otherwise no one's going to want to invest in it, and that the borrower is at least financially secure at that time, et cetera, and that you're not making $1 million upgrade to a $100,000 building, because there needs to be some kind of a ratio. So yeah, that we already went over that. What else? Oh, so leading by example. Yeah, I think I dropped in this other slide before that. So that was the LEAP Act. So another policy that the state can take on is what Evan described already, which is local governments and state governments taking control of their own energy bills, saving money, saving taxpayer money, and making the upgrades for those buildings. So they currently have to meet state code. We could push that and make it stronger. Oh, I have another slide on that. So Kentucky is doing a lot with energy performance contracting. I think there's been some problems in West Virginia with energy performance contracting. This is where a financing company comes in and does basically what I described with LEAP, where the payments are less than the savings, but they do the financing themselves for public buildings, so they don't have any tax ticket. But they were able to create, $1 billion in development. So these are things that we need to be doing. We always say thank God for Mississippi here for them being worse than us, but this is a way that they actually are doing things a little better, because they have specific benchmarking goals for meeting savings in public buildings. But we have some challenges in that regard because we don't know some stuff about our government buildings. So we don't know, where there are ways to save. We haven't gone through and done energy audits. We don't even really know how much the state government uses in energy or how much they're paying in utility bills. And we don't know how big the state government buildings are in any kind of comprehensive way, and really even what all they own. So it's not all in one place. It's not all been collected. So there's a real need to start thinking about this in a comprehensive way. I know that there's been a lot of work recently with the state vehicles, where they've had the same thing, where they know where all the vehicles were and all that. So they've addressed that, I think, and they have a plan for that. So I'm hoping that they take this on next. Research and development. This is kind of barely a policy, I guess, but most of what's happening is going on around here, including this great center here. So we're actually doing okay in that regard, and there's always more to do. So here's my conclusion. We need to invest more at the PSC level, so the commission needs to be spending more on the programs that work and diversifying what we offer. We need to have not that divide based on the random way that the lines are drawn for the two utilities in the state. We need to make it so that there's consistency throughout the state. We need to pass the LEAP Act so I can stop talking about it, and so that we can start to develop more in that way. And the state buildings, and then we need to get that energy code enforcement going. So I guess we'll do questions at the end. Thanks.
Thanks for having me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan Conant. I'm the founder of Solar Holler. We're based in Shepherdstown in the Eastern Panhandle. And we got going about 4 years ago now. We're up to 17 folks on our team at this point. And originally when we were getting going, my goal was to really create innovative financing programs that make solar affordable for those who need it most. So we started out with churches and schools and libraries and homeless shelters and folks like that all across the state. Pretty quickly, though, we found that we didn't have we were getting so much demand around the state, particularly in the southern part of West Virginia, where there just wasn't that workforce. So we set out to create that workforce by partnering with a group called Coalfield Development to launch a solar training and apprenticeship program focused on Mingo, Wayne, Lincoln, Cabell counties. And really everything we're trying to do to kind of echo what Autumn was talking about is to build the solar industry in the state. And that means training up our workers, creating the financing tools, and really making solar and to a certain extent efficiency affordable. So we've actually been kind of straddling this line for a long time between solar and efficiency. Our first project was with Shepherdstown Presbyterian Church, which is my congregation. We designed this really cool crowdfunding program where instead of asking people for donations, we asked people to let us install a little remote control on their water heater. And we actually built out a virtual power plant of water heaters that all turn on and off every couple seconds with the power grid. And we're able to avoid blackouts on the grid. We earn money from this power plant of water heaters, and that goes into a revolving loan fund that I set up to pay off solar on the church. So that initial project we did, the reason we did it that way was actually because of a policy barrier where we got shut down by the State Public Service Commission when we tried to do the first power purchase agreement, which I still believe is legal, but the PSC disagrees. And without that power purchase agreement, because a church doesn't pay taxes and can't get those credits, we got shut out of all of that. So we went back to the drawing board and said, okay, if we can't get that, let's just do it without any help. So all these projects that we were doing with churches and libraries and homeless shelters, we did without any state support or federal support, and we're paying them off in 4 or 5 years just using these water heaters. So that was a really fun time. But I also wanted to give some background information just to, because I'm really positive on the future for solar and efficiency, even in West Virginia, even with our policy challenges. I think this is going to take off. It is taking off. And I think we're going to be in for a crazy ride over the next 10 years. I think this was a year or two ago, the United Nations put out a study looking at how much money we need to be investing in clean energy worldwide if we're going to meet our climate goals. They found that by 2030, we need to be ramping up to pouring $1 trillion per year worldwide into clean energy and efficiency if we want to reduce our carbon emissions enough to not fry the planet. At that point, so when this study came out in 2012, we were at about 280 billion, and we just need to be ramping that up, which sounds like a lot, like $1 trillion. No one has $1 trillion. How can you even imagine that? Well, if we break it down to what that means for West Virginia, that's actually only $250 million a year, which still sounds like a lot to any sane person. But when you step back and look at what that would mean for West Virginia, all we conceptually need to do is figure out how do you divert 10% of what you're already spending on electricity every single year into clean energy. How do we take 10% of the bills that we're sending out of state to Ohio-based utilities, keep that in state for new development? By doing that, we'll generate about 2,000 jobs and be pouring enough into clean energy and efficiency to meet all of to actually fix climate change. Those 2,000 jobs that would be created, not only is this good for the environment, those are real blue-collar jobs. It's our electricians, it's our installation crews, it's also the engineers and the logistics and everything else that goes into making a project happen. So it's just solid work and good jobs, and everybody who works for us, and I'm sure everyone who works for Mountain View, they just love what they do. And this is just an awesome industry to be in. So the benefits to solar, I don't really need to go into that. But I do also want to bring up that the cost of solar is insanely low compared to what it was back in the 70s. Just like you've got in the computing industry, you've got Moore's Law, where every 18 months the semiconductors get twice as fast every 18 months. Well, we're seeing something similar on the solar side. What we found is that for every doubling of solar installations, so if you go from 1 megawatt installed to 2 megawatts and then 2 megawatts to 4 megawatts, every time you double, your price of the solar panels goes down by 20%. The end result of this is that back in the 70s, we were up at $76 a watt for a solar panel. And this is actually a slightly old graph. So back in 2013, we got down to 74 cents. These days in India, things are going in and for the actual panels themselves. This is just the panel, not the labor. You can get those down at 30 cents a watt now. If you're in overseas markets, even in the U.S., it's a little bit more expensive, but it's still no $76. So we've seen just an incredible decline, and because of that, we've seen an explosion in solar. So 75% of all the solar ever put in the entire world has gone in the last 5 years. This is an absolutely breathtaking increase in the amount of solar, and it's all because things are getting cheaper. Solar is hitting grid parity. Solar is now cheaper than utility power across the country, and it's happening at different times in different places. So it was first in California and Massachusetts, and even if it wasn't the sunny places, it was places where price of power was high. And as utility prices increase and panel prices go down, we're just hitting that in state after state after state. So we're projecting that by 2020, we're going to be at that point in West Virginia, where solar is cheaper than anything that Appalachian Power or Mon Power can give you. And it's just going to take off. And so we're at this really interesting point where I actually don't think we need that many incentives or new policies at the state level. I just need the state to get out of the way. And so that's really all I'm asking for, is just fairness in putting these in and having fair access to markets. Those water heaters those water heater controllers I was talking about, those are all hooked up to a regional power grid. So one of the best things we have going for us in West Virginia is actually that we're part of what's called the PJM power grid, which covers New Jersey to Ohio, even Chicago, and it's across the entire mid-Atlantic. All these utilities are connected together into a single grid, and there's real-time power markets. Our water heaters are participating in that, but you can also participate in that with solar and wind. And so anything we do in West Virginia, we can tie into that, and you can actually build a utility-scale power plant, sell the power to people in DC or New Jersey or wherever you want. And so all I'm asking for is just fair access to those markets, and just to not get in the way of the homeowners and businesses who are trying to invest in this stuff. These are the number of jobs and how they changed. So this was based off of the one of the two data sources that Autumn was talking about earlier. So you can see on the far left-hand side, that's solar. We're talking a whole lot more jobs than you're seeing in coal. So coal, by comparison, is 86,000. Now, that doesn't negate the fact that in West Virginia, coal is, like, those coal jobs are really concentrated, so we still need to figure out how do we transition as a state, and that's why everything we're doing with our job retraining is focused in Mingo and Wayne and southern counties where the coal mine closures have been really, really hard hit. But the fact is, like, even at 1% of our nation's electricity coming from solar versus, more than a third coming from coal, we still have, 4 times as many jobs in solar. The other really interesting thing is if you invest $1 million in coal, you're going to get about 7 jobs. You get even less for natural gas. You get about 5. Whereas if you invest $1 million in solar, you're going to get 14 jobs, or in building retrofits and energy efficiency, 17. This is just because this takes real people. It's not a situation where you just you drill a well, and it just pumps out power. Like, you need lots and lots of folks going out and building this stuff across the state. So I decided earlier this year to take a look and see what would solar mean for West Virginia if we really built it out at scale. Jeremy Richardson was helping me look at some of these numbers, and we decided to focus in on 6 cities around the state and envision what would happen from a jobs perspective and an energy savings perspective if we covered every roof in those 6 cities. So keep in mind, this is just within the city limits, so these are still really small numbers, but we just wanted to focus in on those couple places. So Huntington, Charleston, Beckley, Bluefield, Parkersburg, Morgantown. And what we found is just by covering the rooftops in those 6 cities, we could build 1.3 million kilowatts of solar, so 1,300 megawatts, create almost 800 jobs, and build a $100 million industry. So back to our earlier climate goals, we're looking to build a $250 million industry in the state. We could do that by covering the rooftops in 6 cities, get to that 100 million. So that's even leaving aside all the utility scale stuff. This is just good rooftops in 6 cities. So it's pretty incredible what we'd be able to do. The rooftops in those 6 places would be able to produce more than 4% of all the electricity we use in the state. So that's pretty awesome. Just to give you a sense of what solar's looking like these days, that one in the corner is our first project for the church. Upper right-hand corner is an affordable housing complex in Wayne County. You can put this on steep pitched roofs. That one in the middle, we actually had to have rappelling gear for all of our crew members. We hired rock climbing instructors out of Fayetteville to come in and train all of our workers on how to rappel down a 60-degree pitch metal roof. And yeah, so you can put this on roofs, you can put this on farms, flat roofs, you can put it on abandoned mine lands. Anywhere you want to produce power, you can do it. And just a little bit more about our training program with Coalfield. So far, we've had 20 folks come through. We launched this close to 2 years ago now. And through this program, we're hiring up young folks out of those hard-hit coal counties. They're coming in. They sign on for 2.5 years as apprentices. Right away, they get their electrical apprenticeship. They also get their NABCEP solar certifications, and then we put them to work on every single job that we're doing. They're mentored and tutored along by our in-house master and journeyman electricians. And and so that's been really exciting and helping to grow the industry in the southern part of the state. So but just to kind of circle back on the policy front, all I'm asking for are fair markets, because given that pricing, we will beat coal and natural gas for the next 40 years. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. Oh, thanks. I'm Walton Shepherd with the Natural Resources Defense Council. We started as an environmental law firm a while ago, but we now work on a variety of issues in addition to legal work. Especially now, we work on issues related to climate change as it relates to human health and human viability and human economic prosperity. And from that, through that lens, I think climate change is an issue that West Virginia should not be afraid of addressing or shying away from addressing because it just seems somehow incompatible. I just want to throw that out early because addressing it is an opportunity for West Virginia, as I'll get into in a more specific way with the policy. The specific policy I'm going to talk about. But first, I do want to thank the law school for creating the conditions for this important conversation, not just this, but all the panels. I did go to law school here. My first day of law school was actually in this room, sitting somewhere over there. I was probably sweating more profusely then than I am now. And a special thanks to the Center for Energy and Sustainable Development, which was literally the reason I came to law school here, was to take advantage of that. And it has absolutely served me well. And of course, thank you to the university more broadly, especially the West Virginia Forward Initiative. As Brian said this morning, actual implementation of all of these ideas really is the key, because I think we all know we've been sort of, hand-wringing for at least a decade now about what we're going to do about this tough situation that West Virginia is in currently. I think we can identify what to do, and I think it's the how to do it is a lot of times the harder question. How do we get past the paralysis that exists perhaps at the state level in Charleston, and of course outright hostility now at the federal level. So I would just thank the entire audience for choosing not to be paralyzed by that, and at least coming to talk these issues out so that we can hopefully take some actual concrete action. Since the topic of this entire conference is the emerging energy industry or emerging energy economy of West Virginia, I was reminded by some of the pictures today of an early job I had. One of my first teenage years jobs I had was essentially a roustabout for the gas industry down in Kanawha County, Fayette County, around in those regions. I basically just went out and worked on the lines and tried to keep them clear and things. It was essentially a seasonal job. It was a good paying job. I was, a fossil industry worker, and we know that those are good jobs. But I remember asking my bosses, basically the guys that were in charge of me, asking, these pipelines, where does this gas go? So I see where these little pumps that comes out of the ground. This was pre-fracking. Where does the gas go? And I remember no one knew where the gas went. I remember one guy, Boyd, said, I think it goes to Texas, I think. And I remember thinking, that's fascinating. We don't even know where this gas is going. And a lot of these gas lines were also adjoined mining sites, mountaintop removal mining sites, because, it's all sort of interconnected down there in southern West Virginia. And I remember asking, I was like, where does all the coal go? And I remember no one knew the answer to that question either. The best guess was, I think we just burn it. But as it turns out, we do export most of our resources. We export most of our coal. We do burn a fair amount of it. We also export most of it. And we, of course, export most of our gas. And so early on, I was struck by this notion that we're taking this out and we're sending it somewhere, but where's the value-added process? I definitely didn't know the term value-add as a teenager, but I was struck that, what are we doing with these assets in the state? So I'm going to talk about one value-add policy that would help Virginia join the emerging and new energy economy. And it's a pretty simple concept that I'll just throw out there and then circle back to it with more specifics. It's a cap and invest program in which West Virginia elects to cap its total state carbon emissions from the electricity sector and invest the resulting carbon allowance revenue into a new energy economy. Primarily, hopefully, the sexiest form of all would mostly be energy efficiency, actually, would be the most efficient use of those resources, but also solar investment and maybe even just direct customer assistance on electricity bills. I'll say right away, if getting West Virginia to choose to cap its carbon emissions from the electricity sector sounds strange or counterintuitive or even unlikely. Yes, I agree. I get it. I'm not pretending that this is a likely policy in the near future. But I will point out that over 1 in 5 states in our country are already doing this. It's a proven mechanism. It's including next door in Virginia is going to be the next state to do so. They haven't yet, but they're in the process of doing it. And every one of those states has a growing economy. So I just want to point that out, that this is not a sort of a notion or an abstract idea. This is already being done in over 1 in 5 states in our country. West Virginia would then not only have a specific way of joining the new energy economy, I'll also point out that it would be finally a proactive way to at least move towards or even proactively embrace the idea of West Virginia has some skin in the game on this whole climate change issue. Because West Virginia being at the table on climate change, especially in a way that leads to increased investment in our state, would be far more beneficial than the current paralysis of climate change just does not fit into our paradigm, so it'll either manifest itself in climate denial on the one hand, why should we have to do anything about it, we've already done enough, that whole spectrum of just basically we're just going to choose to kind of whistle on past this issue. So I'll just throw that out there. I won't talk any more about climate change, but it is important to acknowledge the fact that currently West Virginia almost can't even conceive of doing something about climate change. And I want to throw it out there that if we did, we wouldn't necessarily be losers if we chose to do that. We could actually choose a winning strategy. A quick snapshot before I get into the specifics of Cap and Invest, just a recap of what is the emerging energy economy right now. And I actually have a handout if anyone wants to sort of look at like where we are in a more sort of nuts and bolts way. NRDC does an annual report on the current state of energy markets, and I have a pile over there. But basically, we'll start with coal. The unfortunate reality check for Appalachia, regardless of whether it's President Obama or President Trump. Unfortunately for Appalachia and West Virginia in particular, Appalachian coal is just more expensive than virtually every other energy source right now. There's a few bright spots in the export markets, but and that is probably not going to change at any point in the near future, if ever. And if you doubt that, you can ask Bob Murray or Mitch McConnell, because they've said the same thing and acknowledged the same thing now, that that's just the reality. So the sooner we recognize those structural economic facts that have nothing to do with, whether it's a war on coal or these other sort of issues, we hope if we change them, it would reverse things. Those are the facts, and, we should deal with those so then we can move forward. Natural gas, we know, is one of the primary drivers of coal's inability to compete in the marketplace anymore. It is far cheaper than coal, but I will point out in PJM, we shouldn't, because we're part of PJM, we should not count on natural gas as an electricity resource being a savior in West Virginia, and here's why. We are oversaturated with natural gas generation now in the PJM market. So if we built a natural gas plant in West Virginia today, it would have a hard time selling its electricity because it would be competing with so many other natural gas plants that are coming online basically kind of as we speak or have in the last year or will in the next year. So I want to be clear, so that value add prospect of natural gas, while may be there for something if like we build a cracker, for the purpose of electricity generation, that option is just not there anymore because we're oversaturated. As we know, renewable energy at the utility scale, it does cost less than coal now. That is without subsidies. When you include subsidies like the production tax and investment tax credits, it's even more cheap than coal is. So that will be a winner for this foreseeable future. I won't go into the stats of just how cheap it is because I think Dan already covered that quite a bit. And of course, energy efficiency is the least cost resource. We have yet to tap it here in West Virginia, and those are both more labor intensive means of producing or saving energy. And talking about the duct tape army and construction. So the bottom line for West Virginia as we contemplate our energy future, clean energy is no longer a niche environmental product. No patchouli here, Mr. Pepper. It is that there are no identity politics attached to clean energy anymore. It's the cheaper resource. So we can kind of move on from that political debate about are we bending over backwards for a resource based on politics? It's based on economics. So the question is how to unlock that in West Virginia and monetize carbon reductions. I'll get into just how cap and invest policy, how that actually works and functions, especially this idea of creating value, monetizing, carbon reduction. Sounds like voodoo mathematics or speculatory. It's basically when you cap emissions, carbon emissions, you essentially are creating some level of scarcity at some point in the future. And when you create scarcity or the anticipation of scarcity, you inherently create value for the right to do that thing, which there will be less ability to do at some point in the future. In this case, it's the right to pollute. It's the right to just put carbon dioxide, in this case, into the air. So suddenly that right to pollute is now valuable because we're internalizing what was formerly externalized. So you create that value via allowances, carbon allowances, which folks have probably heard of that term before. And an allowance is basically the right, this piece of paper, this allowance gives me the right to emit 1 ton of carbon. And the easiest and most direct way to monetize that upfront, that valuable right to pollute, is through an upfront auction. And you hold an auction, and all the power companies come and they buy the allowances, and that is how the states in the Northeast, including our neighbor Maryland and soon to be Virginia, have done it for many years now. And you invest that inherent value that you've captured, again, ideally into energy efficiency. That's what most states do. They directly invest it in energy efficiency, and that value is created by limiting the right to pollute carbon dioxide. I will point out again, if it sounds like voodoo mathematics, I'll just point out the 9 states in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative have been doing this for over 6 years now. They're achieving 3% annual reductions in carbon dioxide through their region. And they've invested through that process annually hundreds of millions of dollars into energy efficiency, clean energy, and direct lowering of electricity bills. Their economies have grown in the meantime, and jobs have been created. There's plenty of studies that show this, and their energy bills are going down as a result because of these previous investments in energy efficiency. Just for total transparency, there is a wholesale market effect of allowances, that there is a wholesale increase in the cost of power, but you can more than offset that through energy efficiency. So I don't want to sound like I'm selling you guys a false bill of goods where just everything goes down and it just magically works. There are market effects of up and down, and there's, someone does have to pay somewhere, but you can make it a net win through the right investments, as Reggie, the 9 states have already proven. More specifically to our south, Virginia, our coal state neighbor to the south, is now doing this as well. Just a quick snapshot of how they got there. Again, this won't start until 2020, but basically their current sitting governor, who has he's towards the end of his term, he came into office, Governor Terry McAuliffe, and basically recognized that as a coal state, Virginia was suffering. That they were having a declining energy economy, and everyone just wanted to hope the glory days would come back. And he recognized that you can't rest on your laurels. The past is not going to repeat itself. So basically, he doubled down on removing policies that blocked solar. For example, Virginia had no solar. 2 years, utility scale solar 2 years ago. It now has 200 megawatts today, and will probably have 700 megawatts by the end of this decade, with more behind that. Facebook just located, just broke ground on a data center there, a $1 billion facility, data center, and the only reason they located in Virginia, this is a little lesson for us in West Virginia, the only reason they did that was because they knew they would be able to power that facility with 100% renewable energy. That is the kind of energy that, as we talked about earlier, corporate procurement goals dictate that's where they want to be. So West Virginia won't land these kinds of facilities if they can't say, look, yeah, we're doing something like Happen and Invest, and we will have that renewable energy for you. Terry McAuliffe also noticed or recognized that they were very short on energy efficiency programs. They have the 10th highest electricity bills in the country, and he said, okay, we got to do something about that as well. So fast forward, it's basically, he recognized that the best way to tackle these issues of no energy efficiency and how to bolster renewable energy was a cap and invest program. So Virginia will be capping its carbon starting in 2020. they'll be making 3% annual reductions in carbon emissions from the power sector, and they do have coal plants, they do have natural gas plants, and they will probably generate back of the envelope their first year based on the number of tons of allowances they will have to sell. They will probably generate about $110 million in revenue in the first year from that first auction or sale of those initial carbon allowances. Virginia will have $110 million to invest, probably most likely in energy efficiency is going to be there because they're more behind in energy efficiency than they are on the renewables side. So that's just, those are real numbers, and that's not funny money. That's actual dollars. Wrapping up, I'll just kind of go through what would cap and invest look like in West Virginia. Again, acknowledging that it seems almost fantastic that that could even happen. But if we did, what would it look like? Well, it would have to originate legislatively or administratively. It would have to be a carbon rule or regulation, could come from the DEP administratively, or if the legislature is smart, they would say, no, we want to do this, and we're going to call the shots on where this revenue is going to be spent. And basically saying to the markets, we in West Virginia at year X, let's say 2023, we're going to be capping carbon, and that is a long-term market signal. In Virginia, they have 3-4 years in advance of knowing that this is going to occur in 2020, 3 years. It's a clear market signal to both carbon emitters to start making reductions or finding cost-effective carbon reductions. And it's also a clear signal to the DANs of the world to say, all right, it's time to really ramp up because we are going to have an even better marketplace for renewable energy. I'll point out that West Virginia's emissions are already going down a modest amount. So there's a little bit of momentum or even free credit there, early free credit that West Virginia has some sort of business as usual early reductions that are already going to occur, and you can monetize those. So you get a sort of early bump, I think, in West Virginia. The reductions you would make after that, say 2%, 3% annually, I have no doubt that renewables and efficiency would be absolutely a cost-effective and indeed cheaper way to generate power than just sticking with our coal plants that are currently increasingly just out of market. They can no longer compete. So we would be doing West Virginia homegrown energy as opposed to purchasing from out of state because it's cheaper to buy from out of states than from older coal plants in the state. On top of the added value of the carbon revenue that you could capture and direct to energy efficiency. I do acknowledge again that it's an almost overly proactive approach to contemplate right now here today, one that won't happen soon. But based on what I think will be the success of our coal state neighbor to the south in doing this very thing, and as we move on from our current policy paralysis and even fear about doing something about whether it's climate change or addressing our energy challenges, I think it'll be increasingly clear that cap and invest is a way to convert our former fossil resources and wealth into future prosperity based on monetizing carbon reductions. So, thank you.
So if folks have any questions, I think we still got some 3x5 cards we can circulate around, and I'll gather those and use them as a basis for asking some questions. I want to start off with a couple of questions. One, Emmett, a lot of states have what's called an energy efficiency resource standard where they direct the utilities to obtain a certain level of annual savings in electricity rates, and Mike Mannypenny, when he was in the House of Delegates a few years ago, proposed such a thing in West Virginia. Is there any prospect for an energy efficiency resource standard in West Virginia?
Yeah, why didn't I talk about that? I don't know. Yeah,
I want to talk about LEAP instead.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, obviously, the energy efficiency resource standard would be a huge game-changing piece for the state to take on. And this legislature is not interested in mandates. They're not interested in any taxes. And so, you have to couch it in a way, you have to focus on programs that the nice thing about being so far behind is that we have a lot of things we can do that will help help grow this resource. So yeah, I think if things were different, I would be pushing for the energy efficiency resource standard, but it's really not. I mean, speaking of cap and you didn't say cap and trade the entire time, but when the new majority came in 2 or 3 years ago, they said they called the alternative renewable standard or alternative energy standard, which included some coal. They called that Joe Manchin's cap and trade program, which of course wasn't either of those things. But so I don't know. I don't think it's unfortunate that it's not something that's possible. I think, but you have to look at things in the long term. So it probably is good to have someone like Mike Manny-Penny to kind of have that conversation, so that it's, you know, when the politics are right, that it's ready. But I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon.
One of the questions that was posed to Mr. Fawcett, which he didn't really bite on, is changing the attitude at the commission staff when you look at what they're facing in the Appalachian energy efficiency case, in terms of, rather than ramping up energy efficiency programs, shutting them down. I mean, how do we start changing that attitude towards energy efficiency by our regulators and our policymakers?
I honestly was shocked when it came through. So I don't know that I have a great answer, because I don't really understand where they're coming from and what their real purpose is for that, because it was a pretty shoddily analyzed testimony. So I don't even think he believes what he's saying on it. So I don't know, and I probably shouldn't say stuff like that, but like, I think that if he put more thought into it, he would have done it a different way. So I think that maybe there is some other reason he was doing it. Maybe it's just that the rates keep going up, in part because we keep buying power plants we don't need.
With their cost issue, I mean, every electric utility makes money by selling units. The more they sell, the more money they make. Energy efficiency is directly against their financial interests.
But they're in favor of it.
Let's stay with me a second. So they were willing, American Electric, much more than First Energy, was willing to do what was actually a credible program, but it was a very, very modest beginning program. And it was enough to certainly pass the window dressing test. But the question then becomes, how do they get their money back for the lost revenues? And they're not willing to commit to anything in the way of full-blown energy efficiency program, because it will eat their lunch. It'll destroy their revenues. So the underlying regulatory issue is, how do you address lost revenues? That's the issue that has the staff and American Appalachian at loggerheads. I mean, I haven't read the staff's thing, but I'll bet you it's predicated on the fact that they have an approach to lost revenues that is incompatible with American Electric Power's preferences.
Yeah, and that's where, without getting into the weeds, yeah, it's well, it is the lost revenues issue, and lost revenues are supposed to, you know, by definition, are for fixed costs, so the costs that everybody would have no matter what. So, you know, the power lines and all that kind of stuff. So if you're not selling as much electricity, to the extent that part of the kilowatt hour cost is to cover these fixed costs, then you have to. What the lost revenues does is bump you up to the fixed costs. But what he was trying to double, which you would pay no matter what if you had the full generation from energy efficiency program, without energy efficiency programs. So when there's this benefit from energy efficiency programs that has nothing to do with that. So in other words, the gap is very small for the lost revenues, and there's a much bigger gap for the benefits from energy efficiency programs, both from the people who participate in the programs, as well as the lower rates for the rest of us. So kind of similar to the graph I showed as well. So his analysis was flawed in that he was conflating that, and I don't believe that. I think he's smart enough that he knows that. But
yeah, one of the questions for Dan, what specifically can West Virginia do or stop doing to get out of the way of solar development?
One of the big ones is, like I was emphasizing, just access to markets. So with this first project we did with the Presbyterian Church, we typically, if you're financing nonprofit solar or even large business, small business, large business solar across the country, you use what's called a power purchase agreement, which is where the solar company puts in the panels, sells the power to the church or the school or the business or whoever, and is able to take all the tax credits and incentives, and it's on the solar company's books, not on the business's books. And the PSC's opinion was that you have to be a utility in order to sell power, even if the panels are on your own roof and the power's never going out onto the grid. Like I said, I still disagree with their reading of the law, but that's their opinion. So when that happened, we lost access, for churches and schools, we lost access to all of those federal tax credits, as well as that whole financing strategy. So that's just a really direct case where, like, I'm not asking for additional incentives, I'm just asking for you not to call me a utility because I'm putting panels on a roof. Like, there's a very different thing between putting panels on a roof and financing it and going in and building new transmission lines and new distribution lines. Like, I consider a utility to be a company that operates all those lines and gets the power from point A to point B. I don't consider it to be, putting in panels on a roof and getting it down into the building. So that's one big thing. Besides that, just sticking to the law as it reads right now is fine. So for instance, we're getting into an issue with Appalachian Power right now, where there's a rule in the net metering standards that says that if you have multiple meters, multiple accounts, so picture a farm where they've got a barn and the farmhouse and maybe another outbuilding, they've got different meters. Well, you can put in a solar array behind one of them and get the credits going against all the others. And the way the rule's written, it says that if you're able to do that anywhere within 2 miles. And Appalachian Power just refused one of our customers who has a house and a farm. They're about 1 mile apart, but they're saying that because the property plats aren't literally touching, that they're going to refuse to let us use their credits for their own business. So, that's just a misreading of the law as it stands right now. So, really, just to emphasize, I'm not looking for additional incentives for solar. I think we've got the economic case. It's really just about, opening up letting us pursue business models that, bring solar within reach of folks and don't get in the way of that.
I mean, basically, the issue is the third-party ownership of solar panels, whether you're doing a power purchase agreement or whether you're doing a lease, that if you own the panels and you're selling the electricity to somebody else, like through a power purchase agreement, or you're the owner and you're leasing the solar panels, then technically, the way the law is interpreted by the PSC, then you are a utility, because if you own an asset that's generating electricity and you're selling it to somebody other than yourself, and we're one of the few states in the country that does not allow third-party ownership, and so it makes it hard for customers to deal with those upfront costs because they can't do a power purchase agreement or a lease, and so you're looking at paying the price of the array and then getting the tax credit. But then if you're a nonprofit or a government entity that doesn't have a tax liability, well, that tax credit doesn't do you any good, and so states that allow third-party ownership, you monetize that, so somebody's getting the benefit of that tax credit, and it's flowing through to the benefits of the customers who can't otherwise use them. So that, I guess, would be a policy change that could be made for solar in West Virginia that would open things up a bit.
Yeah, and it's not, we don't need anything on the residential front. Like, this isn't affecting homeowners. It's really affecting, institutions and
churches
nonprofits and businesses. Because I forget. Oh yeah, it was Evan who was up here earlier saying as a small business he's looking at going solar, but like the thought of taking on, for, $30, $40, $50,000 even for a small business. And then if you're getting up to an industrial scale facility, you might be looking at $1 million worth of solar equipment on your roof. You don't really want to go out and take a loan for that and not be able to put it towards your actual business. They're not really in the business of making electricity. So, those kind of financing tools are really important to open it up for them.
Walton, I think you might need to connect the dots a little bit in terms of the sale of the allowances and how those proceeds are then used, or the investment part, because I think in terms of how like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative works, and maybe what the difference is between cap and invest versus we also hear about cap and dividend, where everybody just gets the money back.
Yeah, so to the second question first, okay, so cap and invest is the same thing as cap and trade. You're just stressing the fact that there are revenues to be invested. Cap and dividend is the same thing as cap and trade and cap and invest, except you are taking that value of the carbon revenue and just giving it right back to everyone just on an equal level. You're not investing it, you're just saying, here's all the carbon revenue we got, and everyone just gets an equal cut. Essentially just either a direct rebate on an electricity bill, or maybe in certain cases it could actually be a check for large enough users perhaps. So that's the difference in the terminology. As far as how the sequence goes, a state would say, okay, in year X we're only allowed to emit 30 million tons statewide. So we are going to conduct an open auction in which presumably power companies, but it could be anyone. It could be, it could be a speculator even. There was early fears that people would speculate in these markets, but thankfully that never occurred. But anyone could purchase these allowances, and there's also a secondary market to buy and trade after that. But in that initial upfront auction of allowances, in the RGGI states, the states themselves get that revenue and do with it whatever they want to do. Again, most states, by and large, invest most revenues into energy efficiencies. Some states do a dividend. I think Vermont does a direct customer rebate. And then carbon emitters have to, if they didn't purchase the allowances in the upfront auction, have to buy on the secondary market enough allowances to allow them to emit whatever it is cost effective for them to do so. Now, that does result in an increased wholesale power cost. Okay, so this isn't, again, this isn't a free lunch on all sides. But again, I will emphasize that if you make the correct investments or just do a direct dividend rebate, that is essentially a wash, that you don't pay that. The end customer doesn't pay that ultimate increased cost. Now, there will be winners and losers based on carbon intensity. If you need more allowances or if you emit more carbon, you're probably going to get switched around in our state, in the PJM, what they call the dispatch stack, right? They turn on and off power plants according to their cost of providing electricity, and the more allowances you have to buy, the more expensive your electricity is going to be. So zero emitting resources are even more in the money than they already are in the dispatch stack. Natural gas compared to coal, there will probably be some switching around. An older gas plant that was behind a coal plant might be in front of the coal plant then. And then the newer coal plants may be okay, but the older, dirtier coal plants, they may be out of market completely based on that. And that's where you start to see that longer term shift over to cleaner resources. So does that explain the sort of the sequence reasonably enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So was Virginia talking about joining the Northeast Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative down the road to do this?
Yeah, so the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is 9 states. It will be 10 once New Jersey no longer has Governor Chris Christie as their current governor. The next governor, regardless of who wins, is going to rejoin RGGI because they saw it as they knew it was a great program. And Governor Chris Christie, unfortunately, pulled everyone out because he thought it was about politics. He didn't know it's about economics, unfortunately. So hopefully we're in a new era where we can move on from identity politics of energy. So Virginia is initially going to just have their own cap and invest program. with the ability to link their carbon allowances with the larger RGGI market. The larger market player, the larger number of market players you have, the more liquid the market is, the more efficient the market is. So the RGGI states want Virginia to trade with the RGGI states. It's you got allowances, we've got allowances. A ton is a ton is a ton as far as carbon is concerned. So it will essentially be as if Virginia is part of RGGI, minus the upfront auction part, because that requires legislative approval in Virginia. But I expect in a few years after they get the project underway, the legislature will see the wisdom of doing that upfront auction where the state gets to decide what to do with the revenues, that they will become a full-fledged member of RGGI. But that, won't be for another few years.
So another question, I think you can answer this one pretty easily. How does Virginia handle its nukes in a carbon cap and invest?
Mm-hmm. Basically, nuclear units, which as folks are probably aware, are struggling right now. They have high operating costs these days. They are struggling against cheap renewables and cheap natural gas. This will actually probably help their nuclear units a little bit because they will be able to compete a little bit better with carbon emitters. But that's in the wholesale market. Other than that, a nuclear unit is just considered just not part of the program. It's not new energy efficiency to invest in, but on the other hand, it's also not an emitter that needs to purchase allowances. So essentially, they will just probably proceed business as usual with perhaps a slight market advantage to older fossil units, but not much of one would be my guess.
Okay. Back to your comment about identity politics, we've got a question. What are the best strategies to educate or engage West Virginia legislators to address energy efficiency, renewable policies? If people want to get involved and try to make something happen in the legislature, what's the best way to educate or engage?
I think Dan did a good job talking about jobs and talking about how it's not about subsidies. I think that would be very compelling to legislators.
From our perspective, what was it, about 6 months after our church project went live, that's when the legislature flipped and the alternative portfolio standard was under attack. That would have taken net metering out. Well, every single legislator in the state woke up one morning with 600 emails in their inboxes saying, "Don't take solar away from me." And that included about 100 from the church we had just worked with, saying, "Don't take solar from my church." So that kind of got it outside of your typical pagan tree hugger and into just like standard, mainline Protestant. Beyond that, I also think we've got really cool potential for, outdoor. This stuff really does crisscross political boundaries, and you can be a hunter. You can really just hate the government and want them off your back, and producing your own energy is a way to do that. There's all different kind of angles you can come at this from.
Walton, you spent some time down in Charleston before you moved on to NRDC. What do you think? How do you package this so it resonates with West Virginia legislators?
Yeah, I think you can only run from facts from economic reality for so long, but I think that means it's incumbent upon whoever has a vested interest in these things to indeed portray economic reality as it truly exists. And that's, I think, is a combination of rising energy costs in West Virginia. It is becoming less economic in West Virginia whether it's to do business or just as ma, pa, kettle paying our electricity bill, concurrent with also an increase in jobs in the renewable sector or the energy efficiency sector. That if we're honest about jobs, pointing to the actual jobs that are created, Autumn going out and finding those 380 jobs and marching those 380 people down to the Capitol and saying these are real jobs, or hopefully they are. I think there is going to be a lag time of what economic reality is and what folks in Charleston are capable of doing as opposed to paralysis or knee-jerk reactions. But I think it's just getting the facts in front of them on a sustained basis, but also with an element of constituent pressure. So it's going to take a while.
I'm probably thinking about that slide that Evan had up there about the corporate renewable objectives, the fact that the large employers are demanding renewable energy in their portfolio, and if you can't provide that slice of renewable energy in your portfolio in your state, they're not going to locate into your state, and that's not the government saying anything. That's what your large consumers and large job producers are demanding. That's another piece of it.
And that was the biggest factor for Governor McAuliffe in Virginia. You know, they have they've taken such a hit from loss of, they're a big federal dollar recipient, not dollar recipient, but just federal workers because of Northern Virginia. And they basically said, sequestration and other things have basically taken a permanent bite out of our economic activity. And so it was, how do we get these sort of new knowledge-based economy companies into our state? And the direct route was creating renewable energy options. And Amazon and Facebook are both building now in Virginia directly, only because of those attributes, or I wouldn't say only because of, but absent those renewable options, they would not be in Virginia. So
I think that's changing. I think there's much more openness. The current governor is being more forward-thinking about that. I think the Commerce Department is being more forward-thinking about that reality. That's very specific piece there, and I would say some of the leadership as well. But you know, there were some humorous moments at the governor's summit where actually the chair of the Senate Energy Committee talked about impacts from solar that seemed like they were a little overblown, to put it mildly.
Just a couple more questions. One, somebody says the downstream strategy study, which I assume is the greenhouse gas study that Evan talked about, showed that the greatest energy users in Morgantown were the business community. What can be done to get them to become more energy efficient?
I think that it's the same thing as with the solar. It's the financing is going to be a really important piece. Is making sure that it's easier for them to make those investments. So you know, LEAP is one piece of that, but that's not going to be the end all and be all. There are financing options. And I think there's going to be a lot of there are opportunities with folks who get excited about the sexy people up here that do the fun solar projects to come back and say, look, you know, you have this much of an energy bill, it can go down even more. So, you know, partnering with you know, with the folks who are already doing that. If they aren't doing it, if they're getting a solar project and they're not doing energy efficiency, something's wrong, because that's not the economic.
And some of it may be the absence of energy efficiency programs offered by Mon Power directed at business customers as compared to, I mean, Jim Fawcett for Appalachian Power. It's a different story between those two utilities in terms of what they offer and what Morgantown served by Mon Power, which doesn't really have energy efficiency programs to speak of for.
Yeah, and the last thing
customers.
I'll add on that, which reminded me of it, is that I think we need to have, and that's what we're working on with EEWV, is to build more of a sense of, this is what that I do energy efficiency. That's my job. And so helping those businesses get off the ground. Xavier, who was here earlier, started his own business in New Jersey from scratch in the early days of energy efficiency programs in the early 2000s. And he built it, sold it to a national company, and did well. So he's available. If there's folks that you know who are interested in making money off of energy efficiency, you should talk to him. Because that's his job, is to help people do that.
One final question from Hank, Hank Love. Do you think a radical change in West Virginia, like deregulation and providing energy choice, would be an option, allowing customers to choose from providers other than their incumbent utility? Is that feasible in West Virginia?
I can't comment about the feasibility because I'm not down in Charleston every day talking to folks, but I can say it would be absolutely transformative and amazing in terms of how much renewable, how much we'd be able to get on the grid. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we need. Like, consumers are saying they want this, businesses are saying they want this, homeowners are saying they want this, and even if you don't live in a good house for solar, or if your roof can't hold it for whatever reason, like, you should be able to choose it. And when we do that, it'll be able to bring more production, more installation, ultimately more economic activity back in state from Ohio. I'm all about West Virginia.
Any thoughts, Evan or Emmett? Walton, on that one?
I think that the the love fest between AEP and me would probably be over. I mean, they would be, they don't want that, and
Yeah.
they got a lot of power. We had our bill. I don't even know. I think that they were just mad that I didn't come to them, and they killed it 2 years ago, and it was just just because they asked, and the utility lobbyists. So, and it had no impact on them. But
That was AEP?
it was they work pretty closely together at the
Okay.
legislature. They got each other's backs, which is and the lobbyists are great people. I mean, they're nice people. I actually really like the First Energy folks. They're very down to earth, and the AEP folks are so cool. They're just really chill. Wow, serious love fest. They are.
Well, let's stop there. I want to wrap this up. Thanks to this panel. And I want to quickly introduce Greg Bowman, our dean, to give some concluding remarks, and we can move on to the reception down the hall. So I'll turn the podium over to Dean Bowman.
I just had a comment to what you're talking about, the trends of going to renewable energies, and realize that there is a long list of major corporations that are committed to going to renewable energy. One of the most impressive I have seen is General Motors, a huge manufacturing firm with 56 facilities around the world, has committed to renewable energy by 2050.
It's not news to me. Greg.
Yes, well, thank you, Jamie. And I am the only thing standing between you and the weekend, so I will be brief. But I do want to say thank you to all of you for attending today's conference. I think it's really been wonderful. Conferences like this, we are so pleased and proud to help put together. This kind of substantive dialogue is incredibly important in the area of energy. And as far as I'm concerned, and Walton, I'm looking at you, any conference I go to where I hear within 5 minutes references to both Chris Christie and Juan Paul Kettle, I think is a dialogue that is both wide-ranging and truly substantive. So thank you for that contribution. So I had Chris in class, or Walton now, I suppose, in class in administrative law. I taught him a lot. He did exactly the opposite, so I am the secret for your success, so you're welcome. This conference would not be possible, though, without support by others, and we'd like to extend our deep thanks to our conference co-sponsors, the Appalachian Stewardship Foundation. We could not have done this without you and your financial support, and support in many ways. It allowed us to provide registration free of charge, so thank you very much for that. We also appreciate the Foundation's previous support of the work of our law school Center for Energy and Sustainable Development, which Jamie directs, in analyzing the impact of the Clean Power Plan on West Virginia, which was really a great and impactful study that I read and I thought was really well done. This conference has been about the way that things are changing, the changes underway in the energy industry, and how we can better position our state, which faces a lot of challenges, for the future and the future energy economy. We are involved, the university and the College of Law, in efforts to assist our state in addressing changes that are underway. We heard from Brian Anderson this morning. Brian is a great colleague who heads up the university's Energy Institute, which coordinates all the really great energy research that is being conducted all across our campus. And on the policy side, our Center for Energy and Sustainable Development is involved on a number of fronts to help shape public policies in this state on energy and environmental issues. And two of the center's faculty members, Jamie and Josh Frichet, moderated panels earlier today, and Professor Pat McGinley was a panelist during the morning's opening session. The center also partnered with the American Jobs Project on the report on opportunities in industrial energy efficiency in West Virginia, and Hank Love of American Jobs Initiative spoke at lunch, and I really enjoyed your talk. I agree with everything you said, and how about that? So you may not get that very often, but there you go. So thank you. We have committed at WVU, under the leadership of President Gordon Gee, to a comprehensive project called West Virginia Forward, and it's a collaboration among WVU, Marshall University, and the West Virginia Department of Commerce to identify short-term, large-impact, large-scale projects that will boost West Virginia's economic development efforts. And again, this is a state that needs that sort of help and that sort of thinking. And this collaboration is supported by research analysis from McKinsey & Company, which is really very exciting, and I think we're off to a good start. And as most of you are aware, Gordon takes our land grant mission at this university very seriously. We are one of fewer than 75 land grant institutions across the nation. And land grants from the Morrill Act in 1862 were established to provide education, broader access to education to parts of the nation where they exist, and to provide service. So we really are a service institution, and we believe in that. And West Virginia Forward is an opportunity to do just that. It's ambitious and it's visionary. We're proud of what we do with that, and we're proud of the work we're doing. And in terms of energy, there's a lot to be done. It's an opportunity to discuss things like rising electricity costs, which we've heard about all day, on the ability of the state to attract and retain manufacturing and industrial businesses that provide jobs, as well as get our toes more deeply dipped into the new economy, cybersecurity and cloud services and the like, to diversify an economy that has not been diversified for a very, very long time. So these are exciting times. They're challenging times. They are the best of times and the worst of times, right? I didn't write that one. I stole that one, but I won't tell you from whom. But we're proud of the role that we're playing, and we're committed to playing a meaningful role in this process. And this conference, which we have every year, is a perfect example of that kind of thing. So thank you all for coming today. Thank you again to Jamie for all his hard work on this. Thank you to the students. Thank you to all the speakers. And please do stay around for our reception, which is where we had lunch in the event hall next door. So thank you all very, very much.